Hi everyone, welcome to this final session of the Let's Tell the Truth Climate Emergency Week. I'm Dr. Emily Baker, a lecturer in comparative literature and Latin American studies, and I've helped to coordinate this week as part of the Arts and Humanities Welcome Season, which was conceived of by Tim Beasley-Murray and has been incredibly supported by Catherine Thompson, Jess Thomas, Georgina Bolton and Dan Poulton, amongst others from the faculty communications team. So really, to start with, an absolutely heartfelt thank you to all of you for making this possible and sort of helping us to, have a space to think about these really important questions. So today, I could not be more excited about the lineup of people that we're presenting and the breadth of topics that we're going to cover. So we hope to build upon some of the discussions from the sessions about literature and film, precisely about the kind of potential of different aesthetic forms to contribute to our understanding of the Anthropocene, so the age in which human activity has been demonstrated to have a geologically measurable impact on the Earth, and humans to be the dominant influence on climate and environmental changes. But we also hope to open up to look at the sort of myriad of different ways in which UCL itself has a high level impact on debates in this area, and how you as arts and humanities students can get involved sort of directly. So for the sake of maintaining this trajectory from kind of aesthetic questions and then opening out to look at everything from activism to UN Sustainable Development Goals, governance and the ways to get involved locally, I'm going to provide some sort of preliminary reflections myself on the way in which I approach this topic in my teaching and research. Then Dr. Lucy Bollington, a lecturer in culture studies and film, comparative literature and film, will present her co-edited book, Latin American Culture and the Limits of the Human, which is in effect a kind of concrete output of work in this area, including a chapter that I contributed. So, Latin American culture, but with resonances that are really global and relevant to thinking through some of the questions we've been thinking about and tackling here. Then Professor Florian Musnug will continue reflections on his teaching and research in this area with modules such as global literature and the Anthropocene, co-taught with Hans de Meyer, and many topical publications that he sort of brings to the table on this topic and in these related to these themes as well. Then we move to Sara Cordovez Lopez, an ex-student of both mine and Florian's, who is now undertaking an MSc in Nature, Society and Environmental Governance at Oxford. So I'm really excited to have her here to talk precisely about this kind of trajectory from being an arts and humanities student at UCL like you into a sort of MSc, if there are transferable skills there that have helped on this path, but also to talk about how she got involved in kind of climate activism through UCL and beyond and became a youth coordinator for Extinction Rebellion with a particular focus on the youth in Latin America. Being Colombian herself, I hope you won't mind me saying, I wanted to reflect on a small anecdote from our class. We had some fierce debates last year, basically, about activism and rebellion and all these kinds of questions. And I'll never forget when she said, in a way that I can't remember exactly how she framed it, but she said to be able to protest in the way in which Extinction Rebellion does in London is an absolute privilege, because where she comes from, you can literally get killed for that kind of thing. And it's sort of humbling to remember, and we have to remember that in Brazil, for example, this year, there have been environmental activists that have been killed, including indigenous community leaders that are killed precisely because they stand up for the environment and for their communities and pose a real threat to economically motivated destruction of the Amazon. And in some senses, they are on the front line for us, sort of protecting our future in that way. So we have to be, we have to be mindful of that as well. Then Simon Knowles will be outlining, exactly how his team works to maximize UCL's engagement with these kind of big picture global goals. So the UN Sustainable Development Goals, we obviously have researchers across UCL who sort of can interact with these in different ways. And he'll be outlining how they seek to maximize the impact in this kind of crucial, globally coordinated area. And last but absolutely not least, we have Hannah Biggs from UCL Sustainability, which is in many ways the sort of practical and strategic environmental arm of UCL, making sure that our day-to-day activities as part of a kind of urban ecology in Bloomsbury and the wider London and the world are as sustainable and kind of low impact on the planet as they can be. And she'll be showcasing the ways in which you can get directly involved through some of their different schemes. After that, of course, there will be an opportunity for questions. So do grab a pen and paper and scribble down anything that comes to mind as we're all talking. So here we probably do a big round of applause to welcome all our guests, but I gather that, you know, applause doesn't work particularly well on Zoom. So I'll just kind of get started with my reflections and attempt to keep that brief so we can get started with the other speakers. So in the literature session on Wednesday, we looked at a short story by an Argentine author, Paula Aloysiak, which, although published in 2012, is set in the 18th century, following a group of explorers into a seemingly virgin volcanic landscape, leading to the sort of inevitable contact with the natives, and in the process being inducted into a very strange fertility ritual with the women on the island. So we had a course to think about exactly how and why history matters when we conceive of the climate emergency. And we found out about the kind of dark side of this exploratory tendency in the 18th century specifically, the kind of Northern European, often British aristocratic elite, sort of exploring these areas under the flag of science, often with the profits from slavery and using slaves to continue this work. And with, you know, as a sort of inauguration of that moment of, you know, facilitating capitalist penetration and further exploitation of resources, it's sort of facilitated by this classification, this knowledge economy essentially at that time. So moving on from that, in the film session, compared to literature, we were sort of thinking about the visual mode as a way of foregrounding the climate emergency, and particularly looking at some contemporary experimental short films by Ursula Beeman. Debbie Martin contextualized these by, you know, centering the role of narrative in taking what can be a wealth of scientific data that is very much out there and accessible, but in many ways needs to be made legible, comprehensible, and tangible, you know, almost be able to be felt in a kind of tactile way that Ursula Beeman achieves, to overcome this cognitive barrier to understanding the scale and urgency of these questions that we often face. So art does definitely have a role in conscious raising, you know, in that way, and both literature helping to contextualize and historicize and, you know, and sort of foreground the different modes of historic responsibility for these events and catastrophic crises. You know, film also has a part to play in a visual sense in making these real through the use of image and different sort of techniques that can vary from the very experimental to the more mainstream David Attenborough documentaries that are widely distributed. So we were thinking about, you know, different forms of distribution, different reach of different modes. And this kind of leads me to my own approach in my module and in my work. Because of the moment we've been living in with the global climate school strikes and Extinction Rebellion, both of which as movements have been very effective in sort of harnessing narratives, as well as inventing and thinking through concrete tactics to try and have an influence on the people that have the power to change things. That's to say, you know, states and multinational corporations. I've been increasingly kind of haunted by the question of whether literature, something which for me is an absolute pleasure, and not just leisure obviously, but also work, of course, because I'm lucky enough to have a job in which I am enabled to kind of read literature and think about it in this way. There's a kind of gulf there with, you know, with that practical activist element that seems more and more urgent. So I invented my module, Landscape and the Environment in Latin American Culture, precisely to kind of create a space for me really to think through this dilemma with my students. And last year, what we did was we obviously read many novels from the early 20th century up to the present day. But I also got students to prepare kind of practical presentations about any aspect of sustainability that they liked. And that really kind of broke up the class and forced us to think through, you know, both our status as arts and humanities students and also our status as environmental citizens who can take practical actions And in many ways, I don't think, in many ways they shouldn't be separate questions, but I still haven't quite managed to kind of reconcile them, apart from in the following way, which I'll sort of exemplify as a case study from my research. So many of you might know the story of the Unabomber, who in the US terrorized the community for about 30 years. Even though there was an entire FBI task force that was trying to track him down, he remained elusive to them and was sending bombs to airliners and bomb threats to airliners, and also to bombing universities. And he had an incredibly kind of ecologically sound, rationale for this. And yet we know that he was going about it completely the wrong way. The kind of, murder is not the answer to this question. And one of the authors that I work on, Ricardo Piglia, who's also Argentine, has fictionalized the story of the Unabomber, and really kind of amped up the ecological dimension to both his thinking and the topic in a wider sense. So instead of being called the Unabomber, he's called the recycler. And through the use of kind of literary doubling between the Unabomber or the recycler and the narrator, Piglia allows us to appreciate exactly what is of value in the Unabomber's thinking, to kind of isolate the really productive ecological ideas and the philosophical formation that's led him to those from his kind of murderous actions, and to draw a line to say, he had the right idea, but he went about it the wrong way. And I thought that was a fantastic kind of novelistic engagement, fictional engagement with a real life event, and that sheds light on it in a way that sort of adds to our understanding of it. On the other hand, there is a very exciting and easily watchable series on Netflix about the Unabomber as well, starring Paul Bettany as the Unabomber. And this series is sort of, it does a typical television style thing of focusing in on the FBI agent who's this dark outsider who's very intelligent, and he's going to help lead the FBI to the Unabomber, except that the organization is this kind of monolithic bureaucracy that is slow to, that puts all sorts of obstacles in his way. In the end, the way that this particular cultural product settles on the question of the Unabomber is around the idea of humans being enslaved to technology. So one of the key scenes is when the FBI agent is stuck at traffic lights, and he can plainly see that there's no traffic coming from any direction. He would absolutely be able to progress, except that the traffic light is red. So it's this idea of, technology enslaving humans that is at the heart of that series. And so in many ways, that series completely misses an opportunity to do something exciting, to put the environment and the ecology, the ecological ideas of the Unabomber at the heart of the story. And instead, it coalesces in a kind of humanist message about, which is part of the Unabomber's thinking, but for me, which is not the most interesting part. So this is all to say that, leisure and pleasure is never going to go away. And we can't all be up all night, thinking about environmental activism and then going out into the world, and worrying about extinction every day and militantly kind of pursuing the activist side of things. There's always going to be that downtime, that leisure time. And Netflix literally can't produce content, at the rate that people are able to consume it. So there is definitely a space for narrative, for that leisure time, but that narrative can be effectively done to center these questions and to shed light on them in a meaningful and kind of conscious shaping way, or they can just do it wrong in a sense. So as a kind of cultural, critic and scholar, I feel that my role can be to help, identify the difference between doing it well, doing it badly, and then hope that future generations of cultural producers will kind of help to use that opportunity and that captive audience to really make meaningful change. So I'll end there and I'll pass over to Dr. Lucy Bollington, who I said is a lecturer in comparative literature and film at UCL, to talk about exactly how her work has focused on this topic and ended up in the production of an incredible edited collection. So thank you, Lucy.
Thank you, and thank you, Emily, for inviting me to participate in this roundtable and to talk about my new book, which I have here, Latin American Culture and the Limits of the Human, which I co-edited with my colleague Paul Merchant, who's based at the University of Bristol. And what I thought I'd do today is I'd say a little bit about where the idea from the book came from and its kind of journey. And then I'll talk a bit about the content of the book and its key aims and interventions. So Paul and I first began to think about this project over coffee back in 2014 in Cambridge when we were PhD students. And what we were really interested in doing was seeing how the turn toward the non-human, the turn toward the environment and non-human animals and so on, that seemed to have really interested the humanities, had impacted and could impact upon Latin American cultural studies. And we were also really interested to think about the ways this interest in the non-human could intersect with key disciplinary concerns. So typically concerns about community, concerns about power as it relates to life and death, and so on. So this was our starting aim. And the first iteration of the project was a conference which we held in January 2017 in Cambridge, and which Emily was part of, where we sent out a call for papers and invited academics from across the world to come and think about this question of the role of the non-human in Latin American culture. And the papers addressed various different topics. Our contributors thought about the role of the ecology in Latin American culture and also animals and technology. And what really struck Paul and I, what we weren't necessarily anticipating, was the huge historical scope that came across through these papers. So I think we thought of this concern with the ecology and this concern with the non-human as being something perhaps very contemporary that would be especially relevant to contemporary cultural texts. And we found, for example, that one of our speakers, who later became a contributor to the volume, talked about an anecdote to do with a plague of rabbits in a work by a 16th century Spanish historian. So really this concern with the ways in which the non-human shapes human existence and shapes existence on the whole dated far further back than we had thought. And equally, some of the contemporary cultural texts that our contributors spoke about were also concerned with looking back over the course of centuries to ask these big questions about the environment, to ask these big questions about the non-human as well. And this is something that's very much captured in the book. The book contains a range of case studies dating back to 16th century history and all the way forward to 21st century fiction, which is what Emily and I write about, and installation art. And the contributors are really very much engaged with global debates about the environment, but they're also very sensitive to specific case studies within Latin America of, for example, extractivism, and also specific modes of thought, so indigenous modes of thinking about the human and the non-human that differ from problematic exclusionary models that we might connect with Western thought about the human and the non-human. Turning now to the book's key aims and interventions, one of our driving commitments came from our agreement with contemporary modes of thinking about the non-human across the humanities, which is that in order to create a more sustainable world, a more sustainable planet, we must expand our idea of existence to think about the role of the non-human and the role of the environment. So we must really pay attention to stories that are told about non-humans and think about existence in these capacious terms. So that was our driving commitment. Another key concept that we explored in the volume is the idea of the limit that we raise in the title. So we were really interested in modes of thinking on the limit, at the limit that separates the human and the non-human, for example, and to really thinking about the way this site can be one of creativity and one of heterogeneity and difference, all the while we're trying to make connections between human and non-human forms of life. And another major intervention and concern of the book related to humanitarian thought. So in certain contexts in Latin America, human rights remain a major question, a subject that's of urgent importance. And so sometimes this idea of turning away from the human and toward the non-human can feel almost counterintuitive in these particular contexts. But one of the things we were really interested to do was to problematize the category of the human and to think about the ways the human is a label that is always employed and applied unevenly. So over the course of history, certain people have fallen outside of this category of the human, whilst others have been included within it. And Carrie Wolf, for example, is someone who we dialogue with in this regard, who's talked about equally the way the term animal has been applied to certain humans across history discursively, and so shouldn't just be thought of as a specific ontological category. It should be thought of as a label that can be applied to different forms of life. And we were really inspired by ideas put forward by philosophers such as Roberto Esposito, that in order to really think about humanitarian issues and human rights, a good starting place would be to challenge this notion of the human and the human person. And again, to think in really much more capacious terms about what life is, which for us was the key to thinking about these broader questions of sustainability. So that I think I'll leave it there. I think sustainability may provide the sort of link between my book and the other contributions on this roundtable.
Brilliant, thank you so much, Lucy. That was a great overview of all the amazing things that you were sort of grappling with and achieving with that book. Brilliant. So now over to Professor Florian Müssner to tell us more about his kind of research and teaching approach to this topic.
Thank you. I thank you, Emily, and I just wanted to say how much of a pleasure it is to be part of this panel and to see so many colleagues and friends and current students and former students in the audience and also on my screen. And I really wanted to just make one point, and I'll try to be very, very quick as well. And it's a reflection on the role of disciplinary knowledge in relation to this wider topic that we're discussing today. And we're very lucky, I think, that our week here, which Emily's convening so masterfully, coincides with this enormous effort that UCL is making and that Simon is centrally involved with, which is the Sustainable Development Goals Conference Beyond Boundaries, which really shows how any thinking about the climate crisis has to bring together disciplinary expertise across the board. And UCL is, I've felt for a long time now that UCL is a place which does interdisciplinary and cross-disciplinary research really well. There's things that I'm less proud of when I think of UCL, but there's a lot of things that I'm proud of, and this is one thing that I'm particularly proud of. UCL, I feel, enables this kind of sort of adventurous thinking and encourage us to take risks and to have creative conversations at all levels, in our teaching, in our collaborations, in our institutional applications for small grants, and encouraging us to sort of go for the bigger grants and the bigger picture. So it's a really, so interdisciplinarity is really crucial, I think, to what we do. And I think the Anthropocene and climate crisis, whatever we want to think of, they're not just sort of interdisciplinary concepts, but they're what I call transdisciplinary vectors. They take you out of your comfort zone. It's not just that you have to have different kinds of expertise, but you're constantly catapulted away from what you think you know already. Like many of the people here on the panel, like Emily and like Lucy, I'm based in the School of European Languages, Culture and Society. And so modern languages subjects are already loose, baggy monsters or sort of hybrid creatures where different kinds of expertise come together. So we have literature specialists, but we also have historical and theoretical linguists, sociolinguists, historians, political historians, working together, often with a focus on particular areas and languages, but also across these languages. And all this is, I feel, a very good starting point for this much more challenging discussion that we have to have around these questions. I've personally moved from Italian studies increasingly in my thinking and in my teaching into comparative literature. Sarah was part of the first cohort of BA Comp Lit students at UCL. And so it's a pleasure that you now made it through and you're still smiling, Sarah. And comparative literature, even more than modern languages, probably addresses this anxiety and this potential all the time, because we're constantly aware of this as people who work with language, and who work with language as much as possible at a transnational and global level, but who only ever really are able to master two, maybe 3 languages if we're lucky, and we tend to sound a bit funny in all of them when we try and speak them. Then we run into these limits, we run into this sort of impossible demand. So comparatist, a friend of mine who is an extraordinarily talented and influential comparatist once said, a comparatist is somebody who knows very little about a lot of things. So I would say, thinking about the climate crisis and thinking about the Anthropocene, we really have to have the courage to learn a little bit about a lot of things, and it's obviously about working together in multidisciplinary teams, but it's also, I think, about the way that Lucy talked about this beautifully, the way in which we bring our own personal trajectories and our sense of our position in these various complex hierarchies of power and responsibility into these discussions. So I think this is a vital part of it. So the whole Inspiring Mind season is a vital part of it, and I'm really pleased that we can have this discussion and we can come to this from so many different perspectives.
Thank you so much, Florian. That's brilliant. And I think that leads really nicely to Sarah Cordovez Lopez, who is our ex-student who has, so much experience to bring now both of, studying these through into now a different discipline, and also lots of sort of outside activities that I'm really excited to hear more about.
Yeah, thank you, Emily. Hi, everyone. I'm absolutely, floored and humbled to be here back at my alma mater, which honestly was my alma mater in the most romantic sense possible. I miss UCL very much, but I wouldn't change where I am right now. So I'm Sarah. I am Colombian. I am doing my MSc in Nature and Society and Environmental Governance at the Department of Geography and Environment at Oxford. Just started only about week 3 now. But I wanted to first talk about how UCL sort of prepared me and became a very fertile soil for me to grow into my transferable skills in a way. So as Florian said, comparative literature is it's the compass bin where the most beautiful things grow out of. For me, it's the discipline within the humanities that is most able and most willing, and that sees the value of thinking outside of the box. It sees the value of imagination in resisting so many of the stories that create hierarchies in our world and that create asymmetries in our world. For me specifically, the conceptual tools for thinking about subjectivities, but more specifically the European white subjectivity through art, I found them incredibly useful in transdisciplinary thinking about, okay, what is actually happening here? And I think the move, obviously now I'm in geography, the move from comparative literature to geography has actually been incredibly seamless, because I think to both of them, there's the understanding of space and place as non-deterministic, and certainly as created by an economy of value production in a way, and co-created and reproduced by stories, right? So within geography and comparative literature, there's both the understanding of space as something quite amorphous that actually we can only ever grasp through a story, but also the understanding of scales and the understanding of asymmetry, and how that actually it actually becomes a really useful way of thinking about what is actually happening in the climate and ecological crisis that we're in right now. But yeah, just in terms of what comparative literature actively gave me, and sort of what I took from it certainly was this idea of how we understand the values that surround us and how we understand the objects that we come into contact in the world is very much determined by a set of stories. And as a youth, 22, I feel like I was born into a world with very broken stories. I was born into a world where economic growth is a fundamental story that we tell ourselves, in a world with a broken story of the gender divide of care and action and what that means when we're talking about land and about the commons and about the climate as a political commons. I was also born in Colombia, in a country of an incredibly broken story of colonial hierarchy, but more than just a colonial hierarchy of violence that it very much was. It's a story of epistemicide. It's a story of the destruction of knowledge because knowledge is produced in institutions like UCL, like Oxford, at the expense of the production of knowledge in other parts of the world and the understanding of knowledge through other means beyond the rational mind. I was also born into, as I say, the broken story of academia and the role of education and the accountability of education to the youth. But most of all, I was born in a world of the broken story of the nature and human separation. That broken story for me is the one that sort of underpins all the other broken stories. I'll talk about that more in a little bit. But yeah, in terms of, again, going from the really broad to the really specific, the more than human hybridity in Emily's course it's absolutely fundamental to my course right now. And the teratology that I explored in Florian's course of Intimate Strangers is absolutely as well fundamental to my studies right now. So I'm really, really grateful. Other things at UCL, I think probably German studies and the way UCL frames it was incredibly useful to me. The Vergangenheitsbewältigung, the idea of having to come to terms with the past, I think is going to be an incredibly important part of where our world moves forward in first stopping the harm and repairing the harm. We will need to have an ecocide, just a reckoning with that in a way, and the way we remember that, the way history is written, is going to be absolutely fundamental. So how I got into activism, because I guess there's a need to also bring that part and that sphere of knowledge creation and knowledge practice to this conversation as well. So I got involved in activism in Germany in Fridays for Future. And from there, I progressed into XR universities. And now I am part of XR Youth Solidarity, which I'll talk to about in a minute. But for me, I would just invite all students to really do go into student societies. I mean, we're not really taught it, to be honest, but student societies and youth-only spaces are so fundamental in creating the confidence needed to actually create youth leadership that brings young people into the space. But more importantly, I think it's about youth education, sort of that idea of I'm learning in the classroom and I'm learning from Emily and I'm learning from Florian, but equally importantly, I'm learning from every single person sitting behind me and sitting behind me and in front of me and next to me. And more importantly, I am creating generation solidarity. I think that's fundamentally key in what the youth does moving forward in the crisis that we're in. And so now I'll talk a little bit about why I got into activism. And I think it's an interesting one because I'm not sure many generations have been born having to do sort of okay, what is my theory of change? What is my analysis of why I was born in a post-apocalyptic world, which I think I certainly was. I was born in a settler colonial state that is definitely a post-apocalyptic space. The world has been ending for like 500 years, and for women, it's been ending for a lot longer than that. So in that sense, my reasons for going into activism was sort of to understand, okay, what actually needs to happen here? What is my theory of change? And within that, and being in this youth-led spaces and creating youth solidarity with my generation, for me, it was very clear that youth is the group within society that is most well suited naturally, and I'm using the word naturally purposefully, most well suited naturally, that is best placed to create rapid transformation, which is what we need, right? I mean, I don't think anyone here is joking, like, it's not taking into account the fact that we have not very much time left if we want to keep it at least under 2 degrees, which at this point it looks a little grim. But when I started thinking about youth and what that actually means to me, I had to fundamentally reappropriate what being young meant to me. That meant going against a lot of the education system in a way, that internalized adulthoodness that I called. So in that sense, the youth as a group within society that is the best place, it's because it's the group within society that has the most ability to be creative in a non-structural and chaotic way. It's the group within society that is most willing to take risks, which is exactly what we need right now. The group within society most willing to engage in imagination seriously. And I say that again purposefully. Imagination at this point in time needs to become the fundamental value that drives academia especially. And also just young people have a lot of energy. And we are in spaces together all the time. If we're not in school, we're at uni, we're like, our ability to mobilize each other and to inspire each other to action is incredible. So yeah, to everyone like listening, I really do encourage you to just appropriate that youthfulness because the world needs it right now. And now I'd like to talk a little bit more about the specific work that I do as a youth coordinator within Extra Youth Solidarity. So I liaise with youth leaders within indigenous communities and local communities in Mexico, Brazil, Kenya, and Cameroon. And a lot of the work that we do is based on solidarity, obviously, in us learning from them and them learning from us, and there being a fundamental want and desire in both parts to dismantle the structures and the asymmetries that our world has put us in, and to find solidarity within being young, and sort of talking about that. And yeah, some key things that I'd like to talk about now, things that I've learned within that context, which has been incredibly like time consuming and draining and absolutely beautiful, has been for me specifically a reconceptualization of the Anthropocene. Obviously, being born in a settler colonial state like Colombia, and again, talking about the importance of stories, I wasn't born into a society where human nature relationships and relations and interactions were positive in any way. I was born in a society where the interaction was always based in the subject-object dichotomy, which is obviously modeled after the patriarchal dichotomy. So I was born in that kind of society, in conversations with these youth, the sort of new stories that I am able to bring to these kinds of spaces are the story of, firstly, like the fundamental difference of how they see like XR's messaging, for example. For them, it's quite interesting that, yeah, like some of XR's messaging is like, we want to live. And they're like, well, yeah, like, bacteria want to live, like everything wants to live. Like, what's that about? Because for them, it's very much not an individualized struggle. For them, it's been always about the territory. It's been always about the land. And that's something that I think escapes these kind of conversations, especially within the Western environmentalist context. So that idea about the placedness of environmentalism and what that fundamentally means. Other things that I've learned has been the embodiment of action, sort of how in creating connections and putting ourselves like out there fully as human beings, actually, that relationality with the natural world stops being an intellectual exercise and actually starts becoming very much an exercise in regaining humanity. So yeah, sort of maybe in conversation to what Lucy said beforehand. Other bit of criticisms that they have of the Western environmental movement is very much the fear-basedness of how it's portrayed in societies like this one, because they find it incredibly powerful and they find it incredibly dangerous. Mostly because I think, alongside something that Emily as well said, the rise of ecofascism is something that at this point in time is absolutely necessary, that we resist, that we talk about, and that we heal from quickly, just so that it doesn't become, well, none of that it doesn't become ecofascism, and this is going to be my dissertation, look out for it, but it's fundamentally the acceptance and actually the understanding the sacrifice zones in the global south, in places that I'm from, are absolutely necessary if we are to uphold our current economic and political system. So that understanding of ecofascism, I think, was really important for them to be like, that's sort of crazy. And finally, the importance, I think, of repair and of fully repairing and healing. For them, resistance, and I'm not speaking for them at this point, I'm speaking for myself, the importance of resistance as an act of healing and resistance as an act of repair, sort of resistance to stop the harm and then resistance to repair the harm, because that's the whole necropolitical world that we live in. We live in a world that doesn't want to die, that doesn't understand cycles of death, that fundamentally is just falling apart because it's holding on to an idea of life that isn't actually based on anything that is embodied in a way. So that understanding of repair as completing the cycle and understanding that as a generational responsibility. And last thing that I'll talk about, because I am absolutely mostly certain that I've gone over my time, is that the thing that we are giving our time as youth most right now is the reconceptualization of dualisms, of that nature-society divide, not as an abstract, not as an actual thing, oh yeah, we should talk about that, I'll go to the park, but actually what are the practices that stem from that ideology and from that fundamental divide. One of the practices is conservation, the contemporary paradigm of fortress conservation based on green violence, based on the dispossession of indigenous and local peoples, is that colonial conservation mindset that we wouldn't really need to be conserving anything if our economic, political, and social systems incorporated ecological beings and processes within them, right? So for us, it's really important to bring to these sort of spaces as well that green violence and fortress conservation as extensions of coloniality, and fundamentally, just rethinking and using the power of imagination to think about that in a different way. And I will stop. I'm not sure how long I went. I'm so sorry.
No, that was incredible and absolutely worth it. I learned so much and continue to learn so much from you, Sarah. So thank you so much for being here. That was so incredibly insightful and amazing. Thank you. So moving on now to Simon. It's going to be really exciting to hear about how you coordinate a lot of these kind of different areas of interest across the university into this sort of framework that we've been provided to think about sustainable development goals and your work. Thank you for being here as well.
Okay, thanks for having me. I'm going to endeavour to share my screen and show a handful of slides, so let me know if they don't appear. So I'm going to give an overview of a really good initiative at UCL. It's very much at the start of the initiative, so I don't have a team, Emily, unfortunately, but hopefully I will get one as it expands. But it's an initiative to maximise the impact that UCL can have on the Sustainable Development Goals. So just very quickly, for those of you who aren't aware, although I imagine most of you are, the 17 goals were a framework that the UN established in 2015 and to which all of its member states signed up to. There's sort of wide-ranging subject matter. So we've talked a couple of times about climate change here, but the goals really are very broad. So they range from gender equality through to biodiversity, climate, but also economic growth, infrastructure, innovation. And probably the most important one is the 17th, partnerships for the goals, and that stresses the importance of working in partnership to achieve the other 16 goals, whether that's global or local. So each goal has a number of targets that sit underneath it, very more specific targets. So for example, under good health and well-being, there are targets around reducing infant and maternal mortality, or road traffic accidents, as an example. And the important thing to note is, although global by design and name, they apply just as much to the UK and to Bloomsbury as they do to overseas. And that's something that people quite often misunderstand, but obviously the UK has its own challenges, just as other countries do, that need addressing. So universities are in an excellent place to meet these challenges, not least because they're big challenges and that they require disciplines to work together to solve them. And UCL's in a super place to lead the charge on this. A, because it's a leading global university, but it's also multidisciplinary, and already people are working across the university to consider solutions to these problems. So the initiative is about 4 months old at the moment. I've been developing it over the summer, and I'm going to talk through its aims, why we're having it, and some of the first deliverables that have happened. So the first question is, why are we bothering? The first reason is, I think it makes us UCL a more attractive place to work and study. I think increasingly sustainability will become a sort of a factor in people's choices in where they go to study or work. And if that's not the case now, I'm convinced it will be in 5 years' time. There's also evidence that industry and philanthropists are using the SDGs as a sort of framework themselves to assess the impact and value of their investments and partnerships and donations. Increasingly, it will make our graduates more employable. More and more companies, organisations are looking to develop CSR activities. Arguably, for UCL, when it comes down to money, it helps to demonstrate research impact. There are lots of problems. The SDGs frame those problems well and demonstrate the impact that a university like UCL can have on the world around us. And as you may be aware, research funding demands evidence of research impact more and more. The other reason for it, as Florian has hinted at, is that it will help to encourage cross-disciplinary collaborations across UCL, and there's evidence that it's already doing that. And some of the activities we're doing, like the conference that is happening this week and next, are examples of how we can further enhance that collaboration. And finally, it is a good thing, and as a university, we're here for the public good. So over the last few months, we've developed an emerging vision, and that is that we should be at the forefront of the global debate around SDGs, the ongoing discussions around their validity, the methodology, measurement, the synergies between them, the trade-offs that are necessary between them. So can you achieve the goal around climate change at the same time as the goal around industry? Can you have zero hunger and maximizing life on land? So there's sort of necessary trade-offs. We want to continue bringing together partners to develop solutions to solve these problems, as I said. We already have, work with people across the globe and around the corner in Camden, and we need to do that more. But also, more important, I think a lot of people focus on the research side of it, and I'm based in the research department, but I have a very much UCL-wide remit and role. So we want to be considered the university in the UK that staff and students view as conscious of our own footprint, and some of the work that Hannah's team is doing already is delivering on that. But we also want to educate our students in sustainable development. I'd like to think that every course, every module, every student should have the opportunity in some form or other to study sustainable development. The goals are broad enough to achieve that, I think. So I've touched on some of this slide already, but we're about the size of a small city, UCL. So we have commonly compared to Plymouth for some reason. We want to ensure that our activities support the goals, or at least minimise our impact on the goals, and that's more than the more visible things like installing solar panels, but it's about having policies that promote gender equality, a procurement policy that recognises the risk of modern slavery, widening participation schemes to ensure access for as many people as possible to higher education within the UK, and so on and so on. It really touches everything that we do as a university. And as I say, we want to educate our students, and we need to equip the next generation of policymakers, industrialists, entrepreneurs, academics, researchers who are going to go and solve these problems, because it's we're playing the long game here, and we need that next generation to come through, and we have a responsibility as a university, I think, to educate those young people. So as I say, we're very much at the start of our journey. The good thing is that the initiative, the vision I've just talked through, and the objectives have UCL's full support. This is going to happen. The shape of it we're still exploring, and the activities that will help to deliver it we're still identifying and working out what's feasible. But from last week it got sign off at the, I think, the highest level it needs to, which is great news. Just importantly, everyone I've spoken to over the last few months in gathering examples of activity that is supporting the goals, everyone is incredibly enthusiastic, and often you find that and apologies to the academics on the panel, but they're not necessarily as responsive as you might want when it comes to administrative institutional activities, understandably so, because their priority is their research. But the response to this initiative has been incredibly positive, from the sort of senior academics down to early career researchers and students. It seems to be something that's mobilising the entire community, which is great. So this week we launched the conference, which is a virtual event, obviously, and it comprises 12 different virtual sessions covering different elements of the goals, but with a thread that asks how and why universities should be supporting the goals. So I'd encourage people to register that. You can get to it through the SDG site. There's still a number of sessions next week. They've been really well attended. And the second thing that went live this week is a website that showcases a range of examples of activity at UCL that is already supporting the goals. That was the sort of the first step in the initiative, really, to sort of benchmark where we are, work out where our strengths and weaknesses are, where there are opportunities to encourage collaboration and so on. So I spent my summer gathering these examples. There's about 80 altogether. It's not comprehensive and never will be, given the scale of UCL. And if it were, then the website would be way too big to consume for a user. There must be hundreds and hundreds of examples that we could have featured. Florian's lucky in that his course is on there, one of the 80 chosen ones. But it covers examples of teaching, of the operational side that Hannah can talk more about, and research. And there are gaps. I'd like there to be more student activity featured. That was difficult because it was produced over the summer, so there wasn't many students around. But that's something we're working on. And anyone on the call that has a suggestion can suggest it via the website. There's a form that they can use to send that in to me. Going forward, well, I should say, it'd be remiss of me not to give a flavour of some of the examples from Arts and Humanities. So in no particular order, we've got an academic who's helping to prevent torture in Chile. We have a Slade school artist that's turning coal waste, ochre, into paint, commercial paint, with the help of UCL Enterprise and Innovation. An academic who's training translators to communicate information in post-disaster situations, so to minority communities. The image you see there is being translated into Farsi, and that's in New Zealand. I think it's hurricane advice. Florian's course in the middle there, and then bottom right we have another Slade artist who's teaching art workshops to children in a refugee camp in Kenya, and using mobile phones to do that during the pandemic because you can't travel there at the moment. So that's just Arts and Humanities. I think that shows the diversity of activity that is supporting the sort of the broad goals, and we're covering sort of 11 faculties and 17 goals and all the operational side of UCL. So there's huge amounts going on, and I think what surprised me most is the number of projects that have been multi-faculty, that we couldn't categorize as one or the other. They're truly bringing people together across UCL, and increasingly I think that will be not just within research, but between research and teaching, and operational side and research and so on. I think to conclude, it's very much at the start. It's still being shaped. Any suggestions, comments, more than welcome. But I think it's really going to frame how UCL operates going forward, and it's almost a kind of a sustainability lens through which we're now looking at all our activity. And I think, given it's got senior backing, I think it really helps to move sustainability up the agenda. And that's no discredit to the work that the sustainability team have already done over the past years. But I think particularly across academics, it will help to raise the game across the university.
Thank you so much, Simon. That was really illuminating, and apologies for referring to your sort of you as a team. I guess if you're more of a kind of lone wolf, or I don't know, sheepdog rounding up the sheep for UCL doing relevant things, that's incredible effort, and we'll sort of watch with excited anticipation about how this develops and grows from its sort of, as you say, it's sort of relative infancy now, but it looks incredible. Thank you. So yeah, now moving on to the sort of last but not least moment of Hannah from UCL Sustainability, and has already been alluded to in various ways, and we're really excitedly anticipating now your sort of your contribution on how UCL also thinks of itself as an ecology that has impact, and also how students and staff can get involved in practical ways through your team. Thank you.
Thanks so much for having me. It's been so interesting to hear everyone else's talks. Yeah, humbled to be invited. I'm also going to share some screens. Cool, yeah, so hi, I'm Hannah. I'm the Sustainability Projects Lead here at UCL. So my role is essentially to enhance biodiversity on campus, embed sustainability into the education. Of course, we've got Simon now as well, which is sort of pushing that forward as well. And I also manage all of the communications and engagement side of Sustainable UCL. So that's supporting students and staff to facilitate making their departments more sustainable and enacting positive sustainable change in their societies or in their daily lives. And this funny image on the screen is the sustainability team at the Sustainability Week last year, where we actually had a forest in the new student centre, which got planted on the top of IOE during Sustainability Week. And the role of, the motto of our team is that we say that to change the future, we have to make change possible today. So we essentially work with a lot of students and staff and academics across campus, and we're trying to solve these big global sustainability challenges that Simon was talking about, but using our campus as a living lab and a test bed. So trying to solve some of our challenges at UCL by using our campus. And then the main aim of that really is to then showcase that to the wider world and society, and try and help shape some of those debates in climate change and other sustainability issues as well. And so Simon alluded that we were the size of Portsmouth, but we're also the size of Torquay. So I just wanted to quickly talk to you about some of our impacts at UCL. So we have 50,000 students and staff, which is huge for an institution with over 200 buildings. So that means everything we buy, all of the energy we use, it can have a really large impact. And to give you a bit of an example, last year we spent £14 million on our energy bill. And whilst that can be seen as quite a large impact, we've since switched it to renewable energy. And we're now working with other organisations like University of London to try and buy our own land and have our own wind farm. So we can have a big impact, but make it a positive impact and sort of lead the way amongst other universities. And we've already spoken about it, but we have world-leading academics solving lots of different sustainability challenges. And so we have a really positive impact in that respect. And then again, you guys will be our future leaders, we hope, we know. And so by embedding sustainability into the curriculum further, we really hope that we will allow you guys to go on to whichever sector it is and embed sustainability into your organisations and make that change possible on a larger scale than UCL. And so UCL often prides itself in being a rebellious university and challenging the status quo. We talk a lot about it being the first university to admit women and people from different countries. But I'm not sure if many people know of this example, and you probably can't recognise it from that image, but this is just outside of Mallet Place on Bing Place. And in the 60s, students got fed up with the amount of traffic going through the campus. And so they got out their paint and they painted a zebra crossing. And a year after, the zebra crossing became part of the public realm. And this is what it looks like today. So I'm not saying that everyone needs to pick up their paintbrush and completely transform the scape of Camden, although wouldn't that be brilliant? But it's the idea that we need to have this guerrilla thinking to change the status quo for sustainability. And we have got this institutional backing, but it also needs this grass movements that Sarah was talking about with the youth and the students to really push forward some of our sustainability initiatives at UCL. So that in mind, I'm just going to quickly talk about some of our signature campaigns at UCL and then how you guys as students can really get involved in them. And so these 3 signature campaigns, they came out of our sustainability strategy that we launched last year. And this was after a whole year of consultation with academics and students and staff. So it's something that has really come out of the UCL community. And the first campaign is called Wild Bloomsbury. It's one of the campaigns that I think is the most exciting. We've been reimagining what our concrete jungle campus could look like, become a wild oasis. So yeah, we've been working with students and staff and different stakeholders across the campus to reimagine what it could look like. And we've done kind of the legwork with UCL in terms of we've committed to having 10,000 square meters of additional biodiverse space. So that's actually 1.5 football pitches if you want to convert it in a less numerical way. So that's something that we're really excited about. And we're working with academics from the Bartlett, students from the Slade, the geography department, the conservation department, all to kind of work out what this is going to look like. And we essentially want to shape the debate in the urban environment through demonstrating that nature-based interventions can improve well-being, something which is so critical at the moment. And not only that, but increase climate resilience. Having plants and trees can prevent flooding, it can create shading as it becomes overheated. We also want to work with Camden and close roads down. Can we reduce pollution? We're in one of the most polluted areas, Euston Road, one of the most polluted roads in Euston. We're working with the chemistry department to monitor that air pollution. And can we create food from our campus and spiritual and recreational benefits? So there's so much that we can do. Yeah, and like I said, we've been working with academics and students, but we've also started working with Camden Council and the University of London and lots of local owners in the Bloomsbury area. So we don't want to just put pockets of green spaces on campus, but by working with people in the area and local communities as well, we can create whole sort of corridors of green space. And so, yeah, we really want everyone to get involved in this. We envision having all of the students planting on campus. Can we get, on campus, socially distanced, of course, to create these planters? We also want to know where are spaces that you want to be greened up. Our vision of it might be completely different. And then there's a whole side of citizen science. We need to measure what biodiversity we have on campus already and undertake bird surveys and invertebrate surveys to see that we're actually making a difference. We don't want to just put plants in various places and hope for the best. And we need to work with artists as well. We need to engage people in this. So it needs to be, as everyone has Florian, I think, alluded to earlier, it needs to be cross-disciplinary. We need behavioural change students, we need history students, we need art students to kind of make this come alive. And the second one is the Loop. So this is a campaign which is to tackle unsustainable consumption by reducing waste and specifying the best products for people and planet. So UCL is looking at everything it buys and how can we change our procurement to make it better for people and planet. But one of the main elements of it is plastic. And so UCL has committed to being a single-use plastic-free university by 2024. we're getting there with our catering. We've got a free plastic-free catering option, but labs is much trickier. How can we get rid of single-use plastic in labs? Is all plastic bad? There's so much debates to go on. How do we have a safe environment, especially with COVID, and not have single-use plastic? So there's lots of involvement needed from everyone to sort of solve these challenges. And we're really fortunate that we're working with the UCL Plastic Hub, which is a interdisciplinary group who are looking at designing out waste from the beginning and then making recycling economically valuable. And they've just discovered plastic eating bacteria in a dump, I think, and they've put it in the lab and speeding it up, and hopefully we'll be able to recycle a lot more waste that we couldn't before. And then lastly, our campaign Positive Climate is all about climate change, mitigating climate change and adaptation. And I've just put some examples of the departments. So this is the Architecture Declares campaign in the Bartlett. A student called Barney was saying we're designing urban environments for the future, but we're not tackling climate change enough. We're not, it's not in the curriculum enough. So he did a petition and got lots of students involved. And as a result, they've got a citizen assembly, and they're working with the academics to shape the curriculum. And this has gone global and is being done in a lot of architecture schools across the world. And then lastly, this is a little bit of a plug for me because the application deadline is Monday, but we have a Student Sustainability Council, and we really want as many students from every single department to be on it. It's about an hour and a half once a term, and the SU and Sustainable UCL present sustainability ideas, and essentially it's a way of students shaping some of the work we do. You can tell us that's an awful idea, that's a great idea, and help us try and make UCL more sustainable. And then lastly, we also have a sustainability ambassador program for students to get involved in. So you can work with your department to make it more sustainable, or you can work with our team on some of our campaigns. And it's a really nice voluntary role that the students have really enjoyed in future years and really made our work much more useful. So that's from me. I'm looking forward to working with you guys.
Incredible. Thank you so much, Hannah. That was such a great kind of practical note to end on in terms of how people can reach out and get involved. That was brilliant. So we do have a few minutes for questions if anyone does have any. And I don't see why we couldn't just press the allow to talk button if people feel comfortable and they can come on and say their question, or if not, post it in the chat and we'll be able to respond there. So I think you can sort of raise your hand perhaps if you would like to be able to speak. Am I right in thinking that? Or perhaps signal on the chat if you would like to speak. I'll give you a minute to sort of think about it. Likewise, if anyone from the panel has any questions for any of the other panel members, you know, this is a round table, so we can incorporate that element of roundness.
It's not a question at all. It's just a kind of sort of very personal response. But I just wanted to say that listening to these presentations and I'm still very moved by some of what Sarah said, and I thought that, you know, Hannah and Simon, you both offered a very empowered response to some of the big questions that Sarah raised, but also just as a father of three, I thought, Sarah, the way that you described both, you know, the hopefulness and the energy of youth, as well as the, you know, the enormous burden that is carried by youth, I thought was just made me think a lot about generations in a new light. You know, not to think, because there's, you know, as you said, fear gets us only this far, and even sort of thinking about responsibility only ever gets us this far. And I thought the way that you brought this idea of sort of hopefulness and energy together with everything we know about the inevitable tensions between generations just made me feel very, very grateful.
Thank you, Florian. Yeah, that's a really nice kind of personal reflection. We've had a question come through as well that involves the kind of practical question of how SELCS, as a department that encourages international travel, mitigates for the impact of flights taken by staff. And I know that there is an initiative within UCL sustainability now, Hannah, isn't there, to actively offset flights. But I would also say that, sorry, do you want to say a bit about that?
Yeah, definitely. It's a really tricky one because especially with like young academics and researchers, a way to sort of progress academically is to fly to these international conferences. I know that not me personally, but my colleagues and my team are doing a lot of work with these conferences to try and work on virtual conferencing. And due to COVID, there's been a lot of push in that direction because we've been forced to do international conferences. But they're looking at the ways to have these conferences but still create the networking and the coffee chats, which is kind of the bit that people see value. And so I know there's a lot of conferences that are being designed now, so they have pocket hubs in various countries, so people can have those meetings within those countries. In terms of what SELCS can do, lots of departments are now creating their own academic travel policies. I can't remember from the top of my head which departments have been doing it, but there's things like banning flights internally. We now have an international policy to take the most carbon sensitive way rather than the cheapest way, which was previously the way that people bought flights on the procurement system. And yeah, there's also a sort of UCL-wide carbon offsetting initiative that we're looking for the flights that we have to go to. But of course, the first one we prefer is less flights, but it's looking at how to do that with continuing academic rigor.
That's brilliant, really good to know. We'll have to check that we're in SELCS are thinking about our policy actively as well. And like you say, I think incredibly now there is a moment of opportunity because so many people have changed their behaviours in ways that are essentially very radical, and that sort of provides that model for, behavioural change is possible, and there are ways of doing things that are more carbon sort of friendly, and this is definitely an area that we should be thinking about practically. Natalie, Natalie was saying that she might like to raise a question, and if the audio wasn't disabled, I would say there. Natalie, your audio should be back, so you can unmute yourself and ask your question or say your reflection if you would like.
Hello.
Hi.
Hi everyone. I just want to say thank you for your speeches and for your information, which is a wealth of information and kind of spanning so many different areas. And so my question is, and I think it does relate to a few of Tim, I don't know who this person is, they can probably hear me. Tim Beasley-Smith?
Beasley Murray.
Beasley-Murray?
Yeah, he was the intellectual architect of the Welcome season. And so, yeah, he's an associate professor in sort of BASC program, and yeah, one of our great colleagues who's been providing a commentary on the chat. Yeah, so
okay, yeah, it kind of runs off of some of the things he's been saying, and again, I just want to respect everything that you've each contributed because I think it's so valuable. The thing I'm asking is, I guess in the UK we have a very high kind of systemic consumption demand, and so yeah, in these post-industrialized economies and countries we have a high systemic consumption demand, and that results in high production and mass waste. So how can UCL as a working institution, and with the responsibility that it has, I suppose, rather than imposing responsibility on individuals, but being able to implement kind of policies on the institutional, regional, and national level, how can it encourage more sustainable lifestyles from its student and staff, and who are historically known for having, we are known for people as being people who have high per capita consumption. So how can I really, really engage with the voluntary initiatives at UCL, but how if we cannot sustain the current system, are there policies that can be, I really recognize as well, over time implemented, not to mention so that it can encourage sustainable lifestyles in the student body, and not to mention the impact that UCL has on student lives as students grow and take on working roles with a lot of social responsibility of their own. That's kind of my question, I suppose.
Yeah, brilliant. So, I mean, so it sort of speaks to the same point about air travel, but also you're thinking about waste. And I remember, so Natalie was actually in my class last year as well on landscape and the environment, and was very interested in the kind of coffee cup disposal phenomenon, and thinking about ways of using art and activism, art installation to show how actually UCL still does produce this monumental amount of coffee cup waste as a one very specific area.
And
I thought
yes,
it was fantastic.
which has definitely, I think I've definitely been able to evolve that knowledge, like not knowledge, but I've learned a lot from, I've met with Hannah Biggs, and I really, really appreciate the time you've spent to actually inform me and a friend of mine, Sam Rana Singha, who we have these occupations, I suppose, in our local environments, probably also as a result of our own securities about the strength of environmental kind of the situation being kind of, I don't know, very urgent, but all, as Sarah has said, also in, let's say, the global south, this is something which is happening already. This is something which we have had we've had to offload already so much on the global south, and this is where the effects have already historically been taking place. So I recognize that as well. But yes, as I was saying, and as Emily was saying, yes.
Shall I respond to that?
Yeah, please do. Yeah.
I'd really love to hear your contribution. Thank you. And your initiative sounds great.
Thank you. I think there's probably two elements to it. One is how do we deal with the waste that is generated? And there is both within UCL, which I'm sure Hannah can talk about, but in wider society, the plastic hub that was mentioned. They're looking at how do we reduce waste by designing out plastic. So if it can't be recycled or reused or composted, then how do we eliminate those materials at point rather than generate? So I think there's a lot of work going on into sort of the, I guess you could say, the curative aspect. Once there is waste, how do we deal with it? How do we minimize it? But the Plastic Hub also has a strand of work which is more around behavioral science, and that's one example of many across UCL. And I don't know them in detail, so I won't try to convey them. But the Plastic Hub is looking at, you know, what is stopping people recycling, and I think you're right. There's a broader societal question about, you know, why do we consume so much, and I don't know if anyone at UCL is working on that. I suspect they will be in one corner of an institute somewhere. But I think it's a valid point and needs addressing. Whilst I've got the mic, should I just respond to Tim's points about how do we reconcile the kind of the radical with the more institutional? And I think the short answer is I think there's room for both. I think radical is not just about protest as a form of radicalism, but UCL's radical tradition is really around academic endeavor and giving academics the freedom to explore and travel down a route of their choosing without dictating it to them. And I think that culture still exists at UCL and has allowed a lot of, you might say, radical research into areas that fall within this discussion and initiative. So again, the Plastic Hub, they're looking at sorts of bacteria that will eat the plastic that can't be reused or recycled. I mentioned an artist in the Slade, Lisa Milroy, who's travelled to a refugee camp in Kenya to deliver art workshops to improve the lives of the children there. I'm not actually sure what motivated her to do that, but I think it was off her own back, and I would argue that's fairly radical. There's also a place for UCL's, how did Tim phrase it, place, UCL's place in society, in that it is sitting at tables with policymakers and can influence wider change as a leading university and as part of Russell Group and so on. So I think it can help to encourage change through the outputs of its research, and going back to research impact, research, a lot of research impact is around changing policy and providing evidence to policymakers so that they can change policy. So I think there is room for both, and I don't think they need to go up against each other. As Hannah said, there's community of students that are have protested on various elements of whether that's climate change. I think divestment as well was something that had a big encouragement. But actually, am I right, Hannah, that the UCL last year did divest of fossil fuels? Is it?
Yeah.
And that was a mixture of student protest, but also institutional work by the sustainability team. So I think there's room for both.
Brilliant, thank you. And I've just said, I think there was another question in the Q&A around a similar theme of sort of violations to, a duality between our actions and our words, and our policy and our actions and things like that. So we have talked about, European waste and the intent, the higher consumption rates we have in places like the UK compared to other places, and the fact that the top 10% of sort of in global wealth terms contribute 50% of all emissions. So incredibly, just same amount as the other 90% of people. So there's lots to be talked about there, and that's really important. And we sort of touched on that a bit, although, we could talk about this all day and it would be incredible to do so. I just wanted to unmute Yui to see if you wanted to contribute your question. You'll have to unmute yourself as well. Hi.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yeah, we can, yeah.
Hello, thank you so much, everyone. And it was all very insightful. I've learned a lot from all of you, but I have a specific question for Sarah. Hi, Sarah. You wouldn't believe this, but I actually did some research on master degrees on environmental sociology, and then I was particularly interested in the exact degree that you are doing. So when I heard you say nature, society, and the environmental governance, I just thought I have to ask you about this. So my question would be, well, I'm a second-year student in comparative literature right now. So my question would be, how did you manage to convince them to admit someone who is seemingly from an academic background that's not really related to, whether it's politics or environmental science, and also how do you find your study right now, and how science heavy do you find your study to be right now? And I know that you said you find your study of comparative literature seemingly leading to your studies right now, but in terms of the actual knowledge part, how do you find it? And also, where do you think this degree would lead you? What possible career paths do you think it will take you to, and then what possible impacts are you hoping to have with this study? Yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much. It's really cool to hear that. Yeah, like similar career paths. So I think my first answer to that would be, I didn't really convince them. I think the Department of Geography here in Oxford is fundamentally interested in bringing in people from different disciplines. So it's obviously based in the geography department, but actually very few of us, are geographers by training in our undergrad. There's a lot of people from political science, there's a lot of people from philosophy, and obviously from comparative literature. So I think, obviously, I'm pretty sure that the reason that I got into the course was an essay that I wrote for Emily's course on Polaola Sharak, which is the short story that I guess you read a couple of days ago. So I think, in a way, showing initiative through your work and through the ways that you're engaging in that work. And certainly, I think I would say, not tailoring, but showing the transferable skills that are there. Like, for example, we have a whole module on methodology, which is a whole module on epistemology, which, like, the basis for that is comparative literature, thinking about knowledge production and thinking about the inherent tensions there, right? So I do think, like, there's the possibility of, like, showing those transferable skills, but again, it's a very self-reflexive exercise of understanding exactly which tools you have gained and sort of using what comparative literature has given you, which hopefully it is what it has given me, which is the ability to be like, but wait, at everything, and doing that for the reasons you want to study the course. I think that was really helpful for me. So a lot of the things that I did was not shaping, but and contextualizing my volunteering experience, for example. Within the climate crisis, my volunteering experience with refugee families within the climate crisis, and then contextualizing my climate activism within the climate crisis, and then contextualizing my understanding of the post-human and the more than human within the climate crisis, and like really going through the literature of comparative literature and finding the things that are going to help you get there, which is like stuff like world systems theory, which is the theory that is basically like what breeds comparative literature, right? So yeah, I think there's a lot of overlap, and yeah, you should define, to be honest. And yeah, just going and asking for some good recommendation letters. I think that's also always useful. In terms of a trajectory, I definitely would like to go into sort of community educational spaces, but also policy making spaces. And because for me, the two should be one and the same, really. There's like the only reason they're separated is just elite capture, and they should really be one and the same. So there's fundamentally a need to just bring education to what it is actually meant to be, which is not a marketized version of a knowledge factory, but actually something that is in service of the community. That's super abstract. So for the start of my career, I hope to go into some educational spaces, not necessarily as an academic yet, but yeah, certainly in like community knowledge production spaces. Yeah, that's sort of what I hope. But yeah, thank you so much for your question.
Amazing. Thank you so much. Well, I think thank you so much to all the panelists and the attendees and all the questions that we've had, as well as obviously Tim for kind of giving us a space to think about these kind of important questions and have this conversation, and to all the facilitators. So especially Jess Thomas tonight, who's been in the background kind of helping everything to go smoothly. I've come away, I don't know about you, but with a renewed faith in the role of the arts and humanities, and sort of tackling these questions, as well as, you know, just a sort of sense of the productivity of these kinds of conversations, and being able to learn from students, professional services colleagues, academics, all of us talking together and learning from each other is so crucial. And I really hope that what we can take forward is, you know, staying in touch with each other, keeping involved, seeing where we can keep having these debates and keep calling ourselves, you know, accountable as individuals, and thinking of ourselves within these wider kind of institutional structures and the wider world as well, which we're trying to sort of imagine a better future for, as is the sort of ongoing, so Tim, I think, is posting in the chat there's 2 more weeks of this incredibly, and one on the local, virtual and global, thinking about again the sort of dynamics of all those different levels that in which we operate, and then finally imagining better futures. So we can really take some of these questions forward in the next couple of weeks as well, so do register for those. So yeah, thank you so much and have a lovely weekend.